Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about factoring by grouping. So this is the second note of our unit. So first of all, when we are factoring by grouping, what we're basically doing is we're taking that GCF, factoring out the GCF stuff we learned yesterday, and we're using it to factor polynomials that have 4 terms. So if you don't remember what a term is, look back at your Unit 3 notes. All right, so here are our steps to factoring by grouping. First thing you want to do is group the terms into 2 groups of 2. So since it has 4 terms, we're going to have those 2 groups of 2. Next, you want to pull the GCF out of each group. So look at each group individually and pull out the GCF. Next, for step number 3, you want to check to make sure that the leftovers match. That will make more sense in a second when we look at what the leftovers mean. Number 4, we're going to factor out the leftovers like they are a GCF. Remember, if something is multiplied into each term, it can be taken out as a GCF. The last step is to write out the 2 factors. So let's go ahead and try this. Let's take a look at number 1. So number 1, we have 4 terms. The first thing we need to do is group the terms into 2 groups of 2. Okay. Once we have our 2 groups of 2, we want to pull out a GCF out of each group. So first, take a look at this 8r cubed minus 64r squared. So let's take a look at the numbers. So what goes into 8 and 64? I'm no longer going to write out those factor lists. But if you're still having problems figuring out what is the largest factor you could take out, go ahead and write out those factor lists. So between 8 and 64, the largest number you can take out is 8. Next, let's look at our r cubed and our r squared. So you can only take out the thing with the lowest amount of exponents. So the most amount of r's we can take out of that first group is r squared. Okay, so once we factor that out, we need to write what's left over. So first, I'm going to take this first term right here, and I'm going to divide it by 8r squared. Well, 8 divided by 8 is 1. R cubed divided by r squared just gives me r. Next, 64 r divided by 8r squared. 64 divided by 8 is 8. R squared divided by r squared is just 1. So I'm going to leave that blank. Now let's take a look at this r minus 8. You should start to be noticing something right now. What's left over when we pulled out that GCF? Okay? Between r and 8 and minus 8, we can't pull out a GCF. The best we can do is factor out a 1. And we talked about yesterday that factoring out of 1 isn't really pulling out a GCF, but we're just going to write it there to help us here in a second. So we couldn't factor out a GCF with that one. So I just put a 1 on the outside. The next step was to check to see that your leftovers match. So if you look here, this r minus 8, those leftovers match. Okay, so because they match, we're going to factor them out like a GCF. So I'm going to take r minus 8 and pull it on the outside. Then I need to write what's left over. Well, left over, I have 8r squared plus 1. So I'm going to go ahead and write 8r squared plus 1. So this right here is our factored form. That's all we need to do. Once you get it written with 2 parentheses, you are done. Let's take a look at number 2. Step number 1, putting it into 2 groups. Take a look at 12 and 21. Okay, the biggest number you could factor out of 12 and 21 is 3. Again, if you still are struggling on how to figure out what is the biggest number, write out those factor lists like we did yesterday. I'm going to move on from doing that, but if you still need to do it, that's fine. So looking at p to the third and p squared, the largest number of p's I could take out is p squared. Okay, it has to be in every term. So now I want to take that 3p squared and divide each term in this group by 3p squared. So 12p cubed divided by 3p squared. Well, 12 divided by 3 is 4. P cubed divided by p squared just leaves, oops, not 14. That should be 4. P squared, p cubed divided by p squared just leaves you with p. 21 divided by 3, I'm going to have a minus, keeping that sign in there. I'm going to have a minus 7. P squared divided by p squared is just 1. Take a look at your next group. We have 28 and 49. The biggest number we can take out is 7. So Can we take out any p's? No, because this term right here doesn't have a p. So now we're going to take and divide each of these terms by 7. 28p divided by 7 gives me 4p. 49 divided by 7 gives me 7. Last thing we need to check, do our leftovers match? Well, yes, they do. 4p minus 7. So I'm going to factor out 4p minus 7 as if it was a GCF. Once I do that, I've taken it out of both of those terms, so I can write what's left over, which is 3p squared plus 7. So then this right here is my final answer for that question. Let's do a couple more examples. Take a look at number 3. So number 3 is pretty much the same thing. There's just a little trick as you get going on it. So first we start off by making our two groups. And I always put the first two together and the second two together. That's just to make your life easier. So let's see, we have 12x cubed plus 2x squared. The biggest number that goes into 12 and 2 is 2. Between x cubed and x squared, the largest number of x's we can take out is x squared. So now I'm going to go through and divide each of those terms by x squared. So 12x cubed divided by 2x squared. 12 divided by 2 is 6. X cubed divided by x squared is just x. So 2 divided by 2 is just 1. X squared divided by x squared is 1. So I still need to keep that 1 in there. I see students making this mistake a lot. When they divide out the GCF, they think it's 0. But remember, 2x squared over 2x squared is 1. You still need to have that plus 1 in there. The only time I don't write the 1 is if it's just a coefficient of 1. We don't have to write it. But if it cancels out to 1 completely like it did right here, you still have to write the 1. So next thing, let's look at this one. Well, we know already that we want to have our leftovers match. Well, here we have a plus sign. So I'm going to want to have a plus sign in that second group. This middle term right here is negative. That tells me I want to take out a negative GCF. I'm taking out a negative GCF. So what goes into 30 and 5? Well, 5. So when I divide that out, I'm taking negative 30x divided by negative 5. I get positive 6x. Negative 5 divided by negative 5, I get positive 1. So I can go ahead and pull those two out like a GCF. So I'm factoring those two out. And when I do that, I'm left with 2x squared minus 5. So I'm done with that problem. Take a look at number 4. Let's go through that one quickly. So I'm just going to talk through this one really quickly, and then I'm going to have you try to. So between 6 and 16, you can pull out a 2. Between v cubed and v squared, you can take out a v squared. So that leaves us with 3v minus 8. Out of this next group, we can take out a 7. When we do that, that leaves us with 3v minus 8. If you're not seeing how I got those numbers, go ahead and pause the video. Think through it more yourself and then press play when you kind of understood. So if we check, our leftovers match and we get 3v minus 8. Our leftovers are 2v squared plus 7. So that is our final answer once we get it down to 2 factors. So I want you guys to go ahead. You can try these next 2 problems on your own. Let's take a look at number 7. So for number 7, we have multiple letters. We still do the same thing. This isn't really that much more tricky than what we've been doing. So take a look at 12 and 3. So between 12 and 3, the largest number you can take out is 3. Now if you look, I have an x squared in both of those terms in the group that follows. So I could take an x squared out of each one. And then I have a u in the first term and I have a v in the second term. So I can't take out any u's or any v's because they're not in both terms. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to divide each of these terms by 3x squared. Well, 12 divided by 3 is 4. Then x squared divided by x squared, that's going to cancel to 1. And then we didn't do anything with that u, so it's going to stay there. 3 divided by 3 is 1. X squared divided by x squared is 1. We didn't do anything with that v, so that has to stay there. Next, we have 28YU plus 7YV. So between 28 and 7, I can take out a 7. I have y's in both of my terms, so I can also take out a y. And then I have a u in the first term and a v in the second term, so I cannot take out either of those. So 28 divided by 7 is 4, y divided by y is 1. We do nothing with the u, so it needs to stay there. Plus 7 divided by 7 is 1, y divided by y is 1. We do nothing with the v, so that has to stay there. So we have these two matching, so we can pull those out like they're a GCF. Then we write what's left over, and I have 3x squared plus 7y. Let's take a look at number 8. So for number 8, I'm going to put these into my groups. Again, same thing. So let's go ahead and try this. So between 40ac squared plus 25ak squared. Well, between 40 and 25, you can take out a 5. Both terms have an a in it, so we can take out an a. They both don't have a c squared or a k squared, so those have to stay as is. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and divide this out. 40 divided by 5 is 8. A divided by a is 1. We didn't do anything with the c squared, so that has to stay there. 25 divided by 5 is 5. A over a is just 1. And we didn't do anything with the k squared, so that needs to stay there. For the next group, between 32 and 20, we can take out a 4. Now, both terms have a b, so we can factor out a b. Then we can't take out the c squared or the k squared because they're not in both terms in our group. So when we divide that out, we'll get 8c squared plus 5k squared. So if you look, our leftovers match, so we can factor those out like they're a GCF. And then write what's left over. 5a plus 4b. So that is our fully factored form. So I want you to go ahead and try number 9. Here are your groups. Notice that there's a minus sign there. So you're going to want to be pulling out a negative GCF. Same with number 10. When you group it, notice there's a minus sign there. So you're going to be taking out a negative GCF. And I'm also going to have you guys go through and try number 11. I'm going to do number 12 for you. So let's take a look at number 12. Make our groups. Let's see, 4xy plus 6. I could take out a 2. Right? So then when I do that, I get 2xy plus 3. Next group, I could want to take out a negative GCF because of that negative sign right there. Between x and 24y, I can only take out a 1. Then I'm left with x plus 24y. Uh-oh. So my leftovers don't match. When that happens, this is what we're going to write. Okay, if it doesn't work, we're done. You're just going to write not factorable. So that concludes your video. Go ahead and go back. Make sure you did the ones I asked you to try the best of your abilities, and then you can go ahead and take that quiz.